Well, Jamil Jaffer, who served as the counsel to the Assistant Attorney General for National Security in the Justice Department and is the founder of the National Security Institute. He is joining us once again live now. Always good to talk to you when we have this kind of news on the table. Appreciate your time this morning. What was your gut reaction when you saw this pretty disturbing reporting from the Post about this kind of document?
Well, Rob, obviously very troubling news if, in fact, the president was storing information at this level of sensitivity in Mar-a-Lago in insecure circumstances. So the real question is, what was this material? What nations did it relate to? How compartmented was it? And why did the president have it? Why was he storing it there in Mar-a-Lago?
And listen, the number of countries around the world with nuclear capabilities, it's not a particularly long list, fewer than a dozen. Would there be any countries that stand out in terms of more dangerous than others or more vulnerable than others if this document pertains to that particular country?
Well, the real concern here, Rob, is it's less about the country and its capabilities and more about the way we collected the information. Was it from a human source? Was it from sensitive signals intelligence? Was it another kind of sensor capability that if the country knew we had the information would blow that capability and make it impossible for us to use that capability again, get somebody killed or like? That's a real concern more than specifically the country or the information about their nuclear capability, I think.
And just to be clear, according to the Post, just I think this paints a vivid picture of just what kind of documents we're talking about here. They say documents about such highly classified operations require special clearances on a need-to-know basis, not just top secret clearance. Records that deal with such programs are kept under lock and key, almost always in a secure, compartmented information facility with a designated control officer to keep careful tabs on their location. We literally, just to hammer home here, we're talking about the most sensitive information that our intelligence community and military have in America.
That's right. It's what would typically be called special access required programs or special access programs, SAPs or SARs, right? Now, the question, though, is what was this information? Why was it there? But also, why are people talking to the Washington Post about the fact that this was the information discovered? If it's so sensitive, we shouldn't be having those conversations either. So obviously, concerns on both sides of this. Obviously, the president having their down like much bigger. We should talk about any of this out whether the Washington Post or the president at Mar-a-Lago.
And listen, the other big news this week was, of course, the judge granting a special master in this case to review the documents. Nearly 13,000 documents and items the FBI now has in its custody. I'm wondering, because the material is this sensitive, and there may be special clearances that the special master may need, if ultimately there is one. The DOJ may appeal. We don't know how that's going to shake out just yet. But when we know we're talking about this kind of material, how much more complicated does that then make the job for the special master and the kind of person who ultimately assumes that role, because that individual will have, again, the nation's top secrets in his or her hands?
That's right. I think they're likely to have to look for somebody who's got an existing security clearance, and they're going to have to be read into these special access programs if, in fact, that's what these include. So I think you're right. It makes their job harder, makes the job of finding the right person for the Justice Department and the Trump team together that much harder. But of course, this is a challenge that, while I agree that the judge's sort of decision probably doesn't stand up to the typical test of what it takes to get a special master, right? I think the Justice Department should have seen this coming. The assumption that their own team would be sufficient probably wasn't going to be likely. And so this, in some ways, while the judge's order seems to go further than it ought to, probably isn't that surprising, particularly given that she had signaled that she was considering it a few days before she issued the order itself.
And of course, the rationale behind that decision being hotly debated right now in legal circles. The president has defended a lot of this by saying, I had a standing. We've heard a lot of rationales, but the main one seems to be that I had a standing declassification order. Can the president, no matter who it is, does that individual have the power to declassify materials this sensitive without any checks and balances?
Well, look, as a broad matter, the answer is basically yes. The president, all classification authority in the government ultimately derives from the president's powers as commander-in-chief. The problem, of course, is if you didn't tell anybody you had the standing order, if you didn't write it down in any way, is it really a standing order if nobody knew you had it? If you just sort of thought it, right? And so we haven't heard any contemporaneous evidence from folks around President Trump that had that order. But at the end of the day, that's going to be a hard argument for the Justice Department to deal with if the president says, look, this information was declassified. That's going to be a tough argument at trial if, in fact, we get that far. There's no evidence yet, though, that the Justice Department is actually going to go down the road of trying the president, although it's very hard to unwind that, given that you've now conducted a search at the home of a former president in, I think, what everybody agrees is sort of an unprecedented situation. The president taking classified material down there, very sensitive material, apparently, and the Justice Department using a search warrant to get it back.
Proof so far of that declassification order. Even Trump aides in the White House said they were unaware of any kind of order. So it would be difficult to prove. Last thing, real quick, before we let you go, I'm going to ask my standard question on this issue. Why would the president, the former president of the United States, want this kind of material in his private home when he's no longer the commander-in-chief?
Yeah, Rob, that's a great question, and one we don't have a lot of good answers to. The president hasn't given any defense of that, any explanation of that. Look, if he declassified it, he doesn't have to give an explanation. But of course, everyone wants to understand, why would you have this material? We had some notes on it, maybe you want to take notes of it. There's no reason to have this level of material, as Juan Haley pointed out, kept in a sense, highlighted in their own separate things.
Jamil, I know you're saying good things, but we're having some audio breakup on our end, so we're going to have to cut it short right there. But always really do appreciate having you on and getting some expertise on these matters. I'm sure you'll be back. The story only continues to grow. Thanks for your time this morning. We certainly appreciate it.
Thanks, Rob.